This is the meta build to use if you want to solo flawless the new dungeon, Warlord's Ruin. We're going to give you a complete breakdown of why this build is so extremely powerful for both survivability and damage output. We're of course using the Solar Warlock build with Sun Bracers. I'm going to give you a breakdown of the subclass that I'm using here, of course, and then we're using Phoenix Dive. This is very intentional, and this is going to give us restoration ×2. That'll be really important, and we're going to keep that timer up, and you'll see how powerful that is because that basically gives you God mode. We're going to be using Incinerator Snap. Now we use this to get a kill on an ad, and that gives us those infinite melees. And then we have to use Solar Grenade to use with Sun Bracers, of course. And then we're going to use Icarus Dash and Heat Rises, and that's a part of the ×2 restoration. So what you do is you eat your grenade, and then you'll use Phoenix Dive, and that will give you restoration ×2 for a very short timer. So it's very important that as soon as you get restoration ×2, you immediately want to kill an ad. You're basically only going to eat your grenade and use your Phoenix Dive if you can see a red bar enemy near you. Occasionally, I've made the mistake, and others will, especially if you're new to using this build, where you'll eat your grenade, you'll do your Phoenix Dive, and you'll look around and you're like, oh no, there's only one ad, and it's a major, and they have a lot of health. You'll shoot them a bunch, they won't die, and then you just wasted that entire effort. You can't keep that restoration ×2 timer up. In this dungeon, though, there's a ton of red bars all the time, first, second, and third encounter, so you will be able to keep restoration ×2 throughout the entirety of each encounter and keep yourself alive, which is honestly just a lot of fun. Like, you can literally just run around like chilling the whole entire time, like everything's shooting you. It doesn't matter if you have restoration ×2. So I highly recommend that. That gives you the sort of God mode style that you're going to need, where you just basically can't be killed as long as you keep getting kills on red bar enemies, or even just majors as well too, which is we'll get to in just a moment. So to make that even more powerful, we are using Ember of Empyrean, which is solar weapon or ability final blows extend the duration of that restoration, and it does count for restoration ×1 and ×2, and that's why this is super powerful. And it will also extend your radiant. And then we're also going to use Ember of Resolve, so just in case your restoration runs out, you'll have Ember Resolve there for you, because obviously we're using Sun Bracers, we're throwing a ton of nades, so that's kind of like your backup plan, and just adds even more survivability, even crazier God mode, way better than honestly any other class if I'm thinking about it in terms of healing. Obviously, Strand classes have Woven Mail, which gives you added survivability because of damage resistance, but what Solar Warlock lacks in terms of damage resistance because of not having Woven Mail, it makes up for with all the different sources of healing, and it's important that you take advantage of that if you want this build to be truly God mode for you. The next part is going to be Ember of Solace, which is radiant restoration effects applied to you have an increased duration. This one's really important, and I know a lot of people look over this, and you could definitely pick some other fragments if you want to spec the build out differently for yourself, but I purposely choose this one because as soon as you do get your radiant restoration, this actually doubles the timer. It's immediately a really short timer. I think it's like a 2-second timer, but this actually makes it a 4-second timer. So when you're trying to, eat your grenade and then do the Phoenix Dive into the ground, this will give you a few extra seconds to get a kill on that red bar enemy. So I personally really like this one a lot. I think that this pairs really, really well with Empyrean, but it's not entirely necessary because you still get up to 12 seconds with Empyrean if you just get kills on the enemies. So as long as you can actually manage keeping that timer and getting those ad kills, you don't in any way need Solace, but I personally just find it to be really nice, and it kind of just makes the entire build a little more passively easy. You don't have to be like super actively shooting enemies and worrying about your timer going down. So personally, I like Solace. I think it pairs really well with Empyrean. And then the last one I went with here was Ember of Wonder. Now, you could pick a lot of different things. There's really nothing else in terms of the fragment selection that's going to complement this build extremely well. This one is just rapidly defeating multiple targets with solar ignitions, generates an orb of power, and I'm obviously using the mod in the artifact that's going to create like a bajillion ignitions, right? So if you have on Rays of Precision, which I was using in the first encounter, in the second encounter I had to swap to Argent Ordnance, and then in the third encounter I'm going to swap back to Rays of Precision as I'm doing the solo flawless on the Warlock. Rays of Precision is while radiant, solar precision final blows cause combatants to ignite, so you're just causing crazy ignitions all over the place with Sunshot, and when you cause those ignitions, it's going to create orbs of power for you, which is just really nice, and I think that really helps complement the build quite a bit. And alternatively, you will also get Radiant from this source right here, which is Rapid Solar Weapon Precision Hits and Rapid Solar Weapon Final Blows grant Radiant, so you're getting Sunshot kills, that gives you Radiant, and then Sunshot kills will then also cause ignitions, and then those ignitions give you orbs of power. It's really nice synergy and kind of makes it so that I'm not required to use torches, which personally I do use on a lot of builds, and torches would be just fine in this slot right here if you want to use that instead. That's the one that's going to give you radiant if you use your melee, and obviously you are using your melee because you're using Sunbracer, so that's perfectly fine if you want to use that as well, but I just chose to use Wonder because I'd have another source of getting orbs of power, which is going to be important because of my gauntlet mod that I'll get to in just a moment. So that's the build in terms of the subclass kit. Then in terms of weaponry, we're using the Riptide. We have Chill Clip on it here, and the reason why we're actually using Riptide is because in the artifact mod, there's a mod right here which is Wall Radiant, deal increased weapon damage to combatants affected by strand and stasis debuffs. And so because this actually slows enemies, you get a buff to weapon damage due to that. So this will help buff your rocket damage, or it buffs itself damage, buffs your sunshot damage. This is just really, really good for increasing your weapon damage output. This is really nice. That's why I'm using Riptide. And then next up we have Sunshot. Of course, I don't even need to say why this is so good. This is just like the best add clear weapon. It synergizes perfectly with this season's artifact. Basically, Sunshot doesn't come off if I'm trying to do any challenging activities this season. The last thing is my power weapon will change. First encounter, I'm using this Bequest, which has Surrounded. You could use Lament if you don't have this. We've got Enhanced Surround on this bad boy. We're able to do really crazy boss damage. In fact, I'll play a clip for you here. Just watch how much damage I do with Bequest in this one damage phase against the first boss. And then my other power weapon is just an Eager Sword, just from going from encounter to encounter. The Rocket for the second boss, and then the Linear Fusion for the third boss. So each boss I'm just swapping my power weapon, but the kinetic and the energy stay the exact same, so that way I benefit from the increased weapon damage from this one. And Sunshot is just the craziest. It also creates a ton of power ammo as well. Now moving on to the armor. In the helmet slot, this is going to be essential. We want Harmonic Siphon this season, so that way we create those orbs of power from using Sunshot. And then we get Heavy Ammo Finder, which it also ties into using Sunshot. If you don't know, a lot of people don't understand how this works. Primary ammo weapon, especially exotic weapons, final blows help you find ammo more quickly. So if you get Sunshot kills while having Heavy Ammo Finder on, you're gonna be getting a lot of power ammo, right? And then lastly, we have Ashes to Assets, which just ties in perfectly to using Sun Bracers because we're throwing a ton of solar grenades everywhere, right? Is it necessary? Not by any means is this necessary. I just throw a ton of nades on piles of ads. I like, having the power of the sun in the palm of my hands, right? And I like throwing the nades and getting super energy from it. So this is just a fun little tidbit to the build. You could put any variation of other mod you want in there. On the Gauntlet now this is where things get interesting. You definitely need momentum transfer, and you definitely need bolstering detonation. The reason why is because, of course, when you spam those nades, you're going to get more melee cooldown, which is going to be essentially getting your melee back because you just used it in order to get the Sun Bracers to proc, so you want to get that back. And then alternatively, you also want to get some Class Blade energy because you're going to use that a lot as well, so that way you can get that restoration ×2. And then your third mod should be Firepower, but I just can't stand the slow reload of Sunshot or Zali's Bane, which I swap back to a little bit every now and again if I'm using a different exotic. So I personally have to use Solar Loader, just can't go without it, can't do it. So I go Solar Loader, but I would recommend Firepower and then just do the slow reload on Sunshot. But if that's the reason why I want to create an orb from a different source, because normally I'd be making a lot of orbs from these grenade final blows, right? But instead I'm making orbs from my Sunshot, and then I'm also making orbs from the ignitions from the Sunshot right here. We're generating orbs from 2 sources. None of them are tied to our grenade. And also keep in mind that you won't have fastball on, which can be really nice to make sure your grenades actually land where you want. So we're kind of speccing in heavily to making sure that we always have our abilities, so that way resto ×2 is up and our grenade is always up, so we're spamming nades like crazy. And then onto the chest piece, nothing too crazy here. I just use melee damage resist just because I'm always in the face of enemies and they're always punching me and stuff. But when you have resto ×2, it doesn't really matter too much. Make sure that your resistance matches whatever's shooting you in the activity. And then on down to the boots now. Now this is where there's going to be a little bit different variation. Obviously in the first encounter, I'm going to have on Arc Surge, and then I did Arc Scavenger, and Recuperation, I just always have this on basically every build, the added survivability is just amazing for this. So first encounter, it's Arc Surge, Arc Scavenger. Second encounter, Solar Weapon Surge, Solar Scavenger. Third encounter, same thing, these 2 solar ones, swap into for the boots. So that way when we do pick up a brick, which we're going to find a ton of bricks because of Sunshot in the helmet mod, get a little bit more ammo. And I think that affects those finder bricks. It might not though, so keep that in mind. It might just be the regular bricks that gives you more ammo, but either way, you just want more ammo because you're going to run out of ammo a lot because you're not on a Strand Titan doing crazy punch damage. You instead have to throw a ton of nades and they're not nearly as powerful as Strand Titan, and you have to use your weapons a ton. So that's just the downside to not using Strand Titan if you're going to try and solo flawless this dungeon, but it's still a very good build, by the way. Now moving on to the class item, we're going to have the most important mods first, which is just powerful attraction is really good. You use your class ability, picks up all those orbs nearby you. This is an essential one though. Make sure you have this on because you really want to make sure you're doing more damage. You're going to have the time dilation so your armor charges up, so that way your weapon surges are proc. You'll want that one for sure. And then this one doesn't necessarily matter a whole lot. You could use outreach. Sometimes I do a lot of finishers, and so I'll use proximity ward. You could use a few different things here potentially, but I think that this is probably the best. And that's it for all of the mods and the armor. Now going through the stats, we've got mobility, means nothing to this build. You don't need any mobility at all. You could have 0, would not matter. 100 resilience minimum. Recovery is important. Discipline is important. Intellect does not matter to this build at all. And your strength is also important. However, keep in mind that basically if you're able to manage your abilities in the gameplay loop properly, you could just have 0 on all of your abilities except for resilience. So kind of base it on whichever abilities you feel like you're running out of. Wherever you're struggling within the gameplay loop, if you're like, oh, I don't have my melee up, well, you might have to spec into that a little more. That's why I have really high strength, right? Just in case melee gets messed up, or if you don't throw enough nades on enemies. Melee, the strength is up to 90 for me, discipline's up to 80, and the recovery is up 5, and this worked out really well for me. You can adjust that, and you could have 80 recovery and 60 resilience and 80 strength, and it'll be just fine. It really does not matter that much. Again, you're gonna get, when you use your melee, with Sunbracers, right? Increases the duration of solar nades, solar melee kills, grant unlimited solar grenade energy for a brief time. So you just get a melee kill and you have infinite grenade energy. So if you don't have your grenade, just use your melee on a red bar enemy, they'll die. What you can also do, make sure to do this as well, is that if you actually look straight down, when you're using Incinerator Snap, if you look straight down at the ground, it like ricochets off the ground and it causes an ignition on the enemies. Versus if you throw it straight forward at the enemies, it just hits them. It doesn't cause an ignition every time. Definitely look straight to the ground and then do the Incinerator Snap and it will cause an ignition. You'll kill the majors even with this stuff. So definitely do that and be mindful of that. So then you'll have infinite grenade energy, which means you could have 0 discipline and be just fine because you're just going to be able to throw 4 or 5 grenades and then you can use your last one. You can eat that one and then use your Phoenix Dive for restoration ×2. So you don't need discipline for that. And then when you're throwing those nades out like crazy, you're going to be getting melee energy back, and you get that from momentum transfer. Causing damage with your grenade reduces your melee cooldown. So you just use your melee, you throw a million nades, you get your melee back from momentum transfer, or at least a good portion of it, and then you can make up the difference with a little bit of strength. You know, you might as well have some strength on there, right? So that's why I have that cranked up pretty high. And then lastly is you want to be able to get your class ability back, and we get our class ability back also by throwing nades and getting kills on enemies with the nade. And so that's what creates a really, really fun and really, really powerful gameplay loop. Also picking up orbs will give us melee energy as well, looping into everything. And then anytime you pop your Phoenix Dive, you'll also pick up all the orbs nearby due to powerful attraction. And then onto the class, or not the class item. Lastly, we need to mention the artifact for the season. Of course, we're going to be using solo operative if we're doing anything solo. This is just a must. If you had no mods on your artifact at all, you would want to have this one and this one alone. This is like 15-20% more damage just by being solo in activity. And then for the first encounter, I used Razor Precision. For the second one, I just took it off and put on Argent Ordnance because I was using a rocket. Make sure to use Argent Ordnance if you are using a rocket. This thing stacks on top of every other damage buff for rockets. It is a must-have. You must use this thing if you're using a rocket. No other options. You got to use that. Even though it does suck to lose Razor Precision, which I love so much and obviously it synergizes so well. For Sunshot, I swap over to this for the Ogre encounter, and then I swap back to it for the final boss. And then we're going to use Revitalizing Blast, which is causing damage with solar ability, weakens champions and bosses for short duration. Now this is really, really nice with Sunbracers. And the reason why is because you're going to use your melee on an enemy, and then you can throw a million solar grenades around the boss, and those are doing damage to them, and those are passively doing damage over time, so you literally can start shooting and using other weapons, and they're debuffing the boss, so that's why that's really, really nice. You'll definitely want to use Revitalizing Blast. And then this one is also really important, like we talked about with the fusion rifle in our kinetic slot, Riptide. You're going to shoot this one time, and this is going to effectively make you do more weapon damage. So that's why we're using that. And then we have Flint Striker here, Rapid Solar Weapon Precision Hits and Rapid Solar Weapon Final Blows, Grant Radiant. This is obviously with Sunshot, ties in perfectly. Then we have Kindling Trigger here. Radiant causes solar weapons to apply Scorch to unscorched combatants. It's also really nice because we're gonna, scorch some targets. It doesn't necessarily cause ignitions all the time, but if there's a ton of enemies nearby, you could potentially ignite one of the majors that doesn't get killed by, all the red bars get blown up by Sunshot, and then it can potentially ignite the major that's near there. And then this one's really important for the helmet mod, so I have that one on as well. And this is also super important. The reason why this one's important right here is because this is going to make it so you can use harmonic siphon, and then you can slot in some more stuff. So I can get three mods in here and a harmonic siphon. That's why we want that on. Then we want this on, so you just do more ability damage to take into sword combatants, which is really, really nice when you're using Sunbracers because you're throwing a ton of abilities out. You're just throwing nades like crazy. So that's why this build is super, super strong. This is the strongest build if you're going to try and solo flawless the new dungeon, Warlord's Ruin. Let me know what you think about the build down below. And if you want the dim link, that link will be there for you. So you can just click on the link. It'll put all the mods and everything on your character, make it super easy for you. And if you enjoyed this video, click on the screen here to watch another one from the channel. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Later.